In the last video, we wrapped our language store component around the language selector and user create. We did this because we needed to make sure that the language selector and user create both had the ability to access data or change data inside of the language store. Now, remember, it's not actually user create that needs to access data or change data. It is the components nested inside of user create that needs to. We're now going to open up our language selector and make sure that we wire up a callback function to it that will allow the language selector to change the currently selected language through our language store. All right, so I'm going to find my language selector. And then at the top, I'm going to import our language context from up1 directory, context, language context, like so. Now notice in this case, we got the default export from language context. So this right here is that same context object that we've been talking about for a pretty good while. We can access that context object inside of our language selector by either wiring it up to this.context through that context types property or by setting up the consumer. Now, in the case of our language selector component, this thing doesn't need to access any other context object. So for this one, we'll use the this.context approach. Okay, so inside of my class, I'll say static context type is language context, like so. So remember, that's going to hook up our language selector to the language context. So now inside of here, we can console log this.context, like so. And we should see some information coming out of our language store. Specifically, everything inside the state object and the onLanguageChange callback as well. Let's try flipping back over to our code, or excuse me, to our browser, and we should see that console log right here. So this is what we are getting from the language store. We've got the currently selected language, and we've also got the callback to change that language as well. So now inside of the language selector, I'm going to remove that console log that we just added. And now we are going to make sure that we change our currently selected language anytime a user clicks on a flag by changing the callback right here. So our callback to change the language is no longer present on the props object. It's no longer being passed in from our app component. Instead, it is located on our context property. So we can modify both those to be this.context.onLanguageChange. Now, really quickly, let's add that console log back in. And then we'll save this and test it out inside the browser really quickly. So if I now click on these two flags up here, I'll see that the language is correctly changing. Okay, so that's definitely working out pretty well. So let's take another quick break. When we come back in the next section, we're going to move over to our button and our field components and make sure that they access this data off the new context property, as opposed to the previous kind of language context they were using. So quick pause, and I'll see you in just a minute.